Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. So now that we've reached episode 4 of ANDOR and the world is gradually opening up and connecting to the wider galaxy and the conflict that is brewing all across it, thought it'd be a good time to take a look at the state of affairs in the wider galaxy during 5 BBY, which is when the series takes place. So the year is 5 BBY. It's been 14 years of continuous expansion of the Imperial military, and the toll on the galaxy can be seen in almost every direction. 14 years is quite a long time. For some, it's their entire lifetime. For others, it's just a living nightmare. On worlds like Jilukin, homeworld of Sienna Ree and Thane Kyrell, Imperial mining operations have rendered entire regions of the planet uninhabitable due to pollution and heavy toxins, just like what happened to Cassian Andor's homeworld of Canary. Although the mining accident that turned Canary into a wasteland occurred during the Republic period. And therein lies the truth. Even during the Republic-era, corporations and mining guilds were pillaging the wealth of the Outer Rim and Mid-Rim planets, oftentimes to the detriment of the locals living there. Remote areas rich with resources and poor in military strength and political power will become victims to the insatiable demands of the galactic economy. In the past, the Republic Senate had lacked the power and political will to enforce its many laws and regulations, and so corpos ran circles around the federal government, finding clever ways to exploit and extract precious minerals and fuels without crossing the line. But now the federal government was the most prolific perpetrator in abusing planetary rights. The Empire needed everything from Durasteel, Dunium, Tibanna gas, Cloud Zone 36, even kyber crystals were in demand. And it wasn't just for the construction of stormtrooper armor, TIE fighters, and star destroyers, walker tanks. There was another project slowly being constructed out in the edges of the galaxy that consumed more resources than anything else. The DS-1 orbital battle station. Originally designed by Count Dooku with the help of the Geonosians, this ultimate weapons project was eventually adopted by the Empire, and construction would begin for the outer shell of the station over the planet of Geonosis. The Geonosians, ironically, were the architects for the shell of the Death Star, and now they became one of the primary labor sources for the project. They're kind of perfect because they were a hive mind species that was really tough and willing to work for basically 0 credits. But by 9 BBY, Moff Wilhelm Tarkin ordered the Imperial Weapons Division to sterilize Geonosis using chemical warfare. Over 100 billion Geonosians would perish as a result. This would be one of the worst genocides in galactic history outside of the Yu Zhang Vong legendary war. As a result, the Geonosian species would more or less go extinct. No one knows exactly why Tarkin did what he did. Well, actually, no one ever understands Tarkin, really. But it's very likely this order came from Emperor Palpatine himself, who wanted to keep the plans and designs of the Death Star a secret, and that meant wiping out everyone who worked on the project. The other major group that aided in the construction of the Death Star, aside from the droids that were used later on, were Wookiee slaves. By 5 BBY, repeated rebel attacks on the Death Star supply lines forced the Empire to continuously delay construction, and ultimately, the battle station would be moved from Geonosis to an undisclosed location. The Empire had a really difficult task here. They were building a structure easily the size of a small moon, and they were basically sourcing resources from many different sectors all across the galaxy, and somehow they had to keep all of this a secret. Moving the Death Star was one way to keep pesky rebels and Imperial senators unaware of the project. But one only had to follow the breadcrumbs, aka the logistical supply chains of materials going to this construction site, to figure out what was going on. Take, for example, all of the kyber crystal harvesting that was going on all across the galaxy. Worlds like Jedha, which had no other strategic significance to the Empire than its kyber crystal-rich surface, was now being occupied by Imperials with high levels of security. Worlds like Alum, which had been a holy planet for the Jedi Order, now had a massive, ugly gash running straight through the middle of it. That opening would one day house an even larger weapon when the planet of Alum would be turned into Starkiller Base, which is really just like the ultimate slap in the face to the Jedi. This was like one of their most holy planets. Another world that was heavily affected by the Death Star's consumption of resources would be Lothal. It had a rich source of several minerals, including Dunium, which was vital for shielding the hypermatter reactor core that powered the station. Initially, when the Empire arrived on Lothal, the citizens had welcomed the Imperial presence, seeing their investments on the planet, which include several mining operations and military-industrial manufacturing facilities, as a much-needed jumpstart to the local economy, which prior to their arrival was mainly focused on agriculture. But by 5 BBY, it was becoming very clear that the promised wealth the Empire was supposed to bring would only reach a few elite members of Lothal society. Farmers began losing their lands to Imperial-backed corporations, and sometimes the military would just straight up kick people out of their homes. The once beautiful planet became polluted with runoff from the mining operations and factories, and soon the capital city Lothal was crowded with farmers and refugees looking for work. When the people of Lothal began to fight back, the Empire cracked down on them brutally. And as things progressively got worse, even the most loyal Lothal citizens began rethinking their loyalty to the Empire. It was during this time period that Ezra Bridger would be recruited into the Spectres, one of the most successful anti-Imperial rebel cells on the planet. By 5 BBY, they would be waging a very visible campaign against the occupiers and disrupt Empire Day celebrations that year. They would also infiltrate the Academy for Young Imperials and intercept several Imperial convoys loaded with munitions and weapons. This eventually would lead to the Empire besieging the entire planet and bringing in specialists like the Grand Inquisitor and even Moff Wilhuv Tarkin to deal with the local rebellion. Lothal, however, would be one of many small sparks igniting all across the galaxy, mostly concentrated in the Outer Rim. There were several other resistance cells forming. You had one of the oldest ones, Saw Gerrera's partisans, continuing to spread out and strike against various Imperial soft targets, ranging from Onderon to Kashyyyk. Saw would be forced to leave one of his loyal fighters, Jyn Erso, behind in 5 BBY when several other members of his group began to suspect that she was the daughter of Galen Erso, the famed Imperial scientist who was in charge of the Death Star weapons program. The fact that Saw Gerrera had to leave behind this 16-year-old girl by herself shows us that he was probably beginning to lose control of the partisans who, after decades of repeated fighting and suffering, had become a very radical and dangerous organization. Also in 5 BBY, General Dodonna, a former Republic Venator-class bridge officer and one of the first captains of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, defects to the rebellion and is placed in charge of a large rebel fleet that would eventually become the Massassi Group. At the same time, the Mon Calamari merchant navy that had escaped their home planet almost a decade ago was also beginning to receive more starfighter and pilots from the loose coalitions of rebel cells being set up by Bail Organa. During this time period, Mon Mothma would begin to actively set up her own network of spies and anti-Imperials on Coruscant. She would also begin moonlighting as a resistance leader. Mon Mothma was probably beginning to realize, finally, that the Senate she served in was no longer capable of resisting the Empire anymore. It was basically powerless. The Empire's most recent action, the blockade of Gorman, which would lead to mass starvation amongst the planet's population, was just another sign that she had to step up her game. Meanwhile, the Empire was setting up their own strategy to counter the growing unrest that was beginning to pop up all across the Outer Rim. The ISB, or Imperial Security Bureau, was growing in power and quickly becoming one of the most flexible tools the Emperor had available to cut out the, quote, cancerous growth that was the rebellion. This organization was technically a part of Compnor, which was a non-military political organization that formed the ideological base for Emperor Palpatine's rule. In the earlier years of the Empire, the ISB was mainly focused on internal dissent, loyalty, and spreading Imperial propaganda. Now it was taking on many of the duties formerly given out to the Imperial military intelligence and security forces. As the rebellion would grow in size and popularity, the ISB would also match its growth. Roughly around 5 BBY, the Chiss warrior known as Thrawn is assigned command of the Imperial-class Star Destroyer known as the Chimera. Never has such a young officer risen so quickly amongst the Imperial ranks, and he was a blue alien at that. Great things are expected out of him, and now he'll be working directly with Grand Moff Wilhuv Tarkin, governor of the Outer Rim territories. In my opinion, Thrawn is the only shot the Empire has at this early point to stop the rebellion from growing out of control. In 6 BBY, Quadrant Yards makes a surprising move by designing the Raider-class Corvette. This is a market segment that was previously dominated by companies like Corellian Engineering Corporation, which offered civilian and commercial ships that could be converted into military vessels on the cheap. Unlike its Corellian competitors, the Raider class wasn't designed for ad hoc frontier security or Outer Rim Imperial garrisons. It was a state-of-the-art military vessel from the outset. It was heavily armed and very much reminiscent of Quadrant Yard's larger offerings like the Imperial-class Star Destroyer. The Raider would become a popular ship for special forces units and anti-rebel task forces. The swift craft was much better suited for hunting down small rebel fleets, usually made up of swift blockade runners and snub fighters. So as you can see, guys, pressure is beginning to build up in the Outer Rim, and that will eventually spill out into the Mid-Rim and the colonies and more core-wards. As you can tell, people have had enough of Imperial rule by this point. If you guys want to learn more about this period in time, 5BBY, not only could you watch ANDOR, which is out right now, you can also check out the Rebels series, which covers basically events happening on Lothal. It's an interesting show because it focuses on just one planet and what happens there as the Rebels and the Empire go back and forth and continue to escalate their forces on that planet until the entire planet is engulfed in a full-blown war. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our coverage. My name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,